Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again. You know something, I've always sort of seen the liberty movement and libertarianism as a whole as being pretty much like any other movement. It's a group of people bound together in a common cause and for a common end. And with that comes the potential for some corrective measures needing to be taken from time to time. Sometimes certain members of the movement that loudly proclaim themselves to be out in the open as supporting the movement and happy to enjoy all of the press coverage that comes with it need to be taken to the woodshed and need to have a few things explained to them. Specifically, in this case, they need to have an explanation given to them as to why any and all political ideologies have to have a practical outcome. And with this comes the critique that I have, and this was a little time coming, but it was something that only recently came to me as something that needed to be done. Reason TV, Reason Magazine, Reason this, Reason that. I have a confession for all of you. Whenever somebody accents something like reason or rational or logic or logical in their very name, question marks start popping up in my head. Because if you're going to advertise it that loudly, there must be some question in the matter. And indeed, you will find amongst people that you engage in debate with, the ones that usually have the weakest and most idiotic ideas are the ones that shout the loudest that they're dealing with facts and that they are arguing from a reasoned standpoint. Well, let's talk about the reasonable applications of libertarianism, and specifically how it pertains to the current presidential election. The so-called American mainstream views libertarianism as a joke. I have a dirty little secret to tell all of you. For the past couple of years, I've started to agree with them to a certain extent. And the reason for this is because we have too many people out there simply to get their name into the headlines and not really actually doing anything constructive for the actual cause of liberty. We're not seeing a lot of victories in libertarianism because we have too many damn prima donnas going around saying, "Oh, look at me, look at me." And I would wager to guess that a number of recent hit pieces that have been penned by Reason Magazine, a so-called libertarian news outlet, and even from some people in the Cato Institute also, is motivated less upon any actual substantive disagreements with Ron Paul and more out of jealousy because he's grabbing headlines and they're left standing there looking like inanimate objects. And I would argue that there's a case to be made that certain membership in the writer's staff at Reason Magazine would do well to become inanimate objects because nothing coming out of them is of any inherent value. I've written socialist and or communistic writings that actually have more practical application, albeit as wrong-headed as they are, than I do out of some of the dross that comes out of this outlet. But just to keep it all on the up and up, this video is in part a response to the video that I just saw featuring one Miss, what was her name again? I keep forgetting it. I'm always seeing her on the television and it just drives me nuts. Katherine, yeah, her name's Katherine something or other. Alright, her name is all over the video that this is in response to. It's on moxnews.com and it's getting rightfully downvoted like crazy. She took it upon herself to say over and over again ad nauseum that Ron Paul is not going to win, as if the fine art of witchcraft and necromancy is firmly in her grasp, which I actually would not have a hard time believing, given how she looks whenever she has a photograph taken of her and the way she appears on camera. People like to say that Michelle Bachmann looks crazy, take a look at this woman. Go over to the video that this is in response to, and also here, I'll give you a nice little quick thrown together work of satirical art that I put together, and I think this actually applies to this woman. So anyway, she and others at Reason magazine have taken it upon themselves to say the same things as the Fox two-party establishment, but they are saying it more directly, they are saying it more loudly, and they are doing far more damage because people that would support Ron Paul listen to them. As far as I'm concerned, Reason magazine has partial responsibility in the fact that the Tea Party cannot wean itself off of the insane quest for blood that they're on in the Middle East. Ron Paul is the only real cure for that I see. I mean, Gary Johnson too maybe, but the media has pretty much already quashed him, which I'm not happy about at all. But just to accent my point, I am going to read something for you. This was written little more than a year ago. It was back in February 2010, and it was in reaction to the straw poll victory at the Conservative Political Action Conference, the one where Ron Paul got booed because the results were read to a group of an audience packed with Romney supporters. This was written by David Hersani, I think. And this is about as disgusting of a job that I've ever seen on Ron Paul, ever. It tops anything I've heard out of Cenk Uygur or any of these other morons associated with the political left or the neocons. And it reads, "What are we to make of the Republican Party's future now that Libertarian Representative Ron Paul won the presidential straw poll at the well-attended Conservative Political Action Conference last week? Is the GOP about to transform into the party of the gold standard? Let's for a moment forget Paul." Well, I think that Reason would love nothing more than forget about Ron Paul, because that way they can grab the headlines instead of him. Continuing. "And how I wish this could be a permanent condition, considering the congressman is neither a serious politician nor, and I can't stress this enough, a serious thinker." You know something? Murray Rothbard, who was a very, very important person in the foundation of libertarian and free market politics, thought very differently of Ron Paul than you, Mr. Harsanyi. What the hell have you been doing for the cause of smaller government? I'm willing to guess probably nothing. Anyway, continuing on. "Libertarianism offers conservatives, many of them new to political activism, an earnest ideological alternative to the process-heavy politics that dominate Washington. It allows Republicans to cleanse themselves of the GOP's failure to deliver on promises of smaller government and fiscal restraint. None of this is new, and 1964 Barry Goldwater would be considered a libertarian today by many measures. That the National Review constructed a fusionist effort to bring the parties together. Ronald Reagan explained to Reason magazine back in 1975 that the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. Two sticking points preventing this fling from turning into something more serious have been social issues and war. Has anything changed to alter the dynamics of the relationship? Probably not. I beg to differ. There are many people in the Republican Party that are starting to think a little differently about our foreign policy. Not in a consistent fashion, but they're starting to. And need I not forget that the Go Proud movement is picking up steam and actually roped in Ann Coulter? But anyway, continuing on. Pat Buchanan recently claimed that the GOP is showing signs of turning away from its recent foreign policy positions. The focus of policy may have changed, and perhaps there is more reluctance in nation building, but polls pretty clearly illustrate Republicans still believe in a robust and proactive national defense. That is changing, and you are doing nothing to help it at all, Mr. Reason magazine. Anyway, continuing. Social issues are far more complex, and they always have been, despite caricatures, but the reality is that most of the cultural issues that divide Americans have been mired in political stalemates. You can debate abortion all day long, policy won't be changing. That's because it's been argued the wrong way. when you get the right people in the judicial branch, which is where this problem started, this will all be fixed. You can't legislate away a Supreme Court decision. You have to populate the Supreme Court with people that can actually recognize that when you are destroying a fetus, that you are actually destroying a human being. There is no distinction whatsoever in terms of the DNA code in there, not one bit. And there is every reason to believe, based on ultrasound and other recent advents of technology, that these fetuses feel a lot of pain, probably on par with what the sacrifices to Baal and Moloch felt in the Old Testament testimonies of such events. Anyway, continuing on. Economics, on the other hand, touches almost everything in a tangible way. That, and one of the most aggressive left-wing economic agendas in American history, makes the libertarian fiscal message seductive. Does that mean we need Paul? The fact that you asked that question reveals the immediate answer. Congressman Paul is committed to bringing the conservative movement back to its traditional platform of limited government, balanced budgets, and a foreign policy of non-intervention, claims Jesse Benton, Paul's spokesman. If only it stopped there. Paul isn't a traditional conservative. His obsession with long-decided monetary policy and isolationism. Oh, I love this. Libertarians are calling Ron Paul's foreign policy isolationist. The dirty little secret here, my friends, is not that the Republican and Democrat parties don't understand isolationism. That much is obvious. The problem is that the libertarian establishment doesn't understand it either, at least if we go by Reason Magazine as a outlet for the established thought process. And indeed, this is also echoed by many in the Cato Institute. Cato, I think a new name for Cato should be Cowards Against Traditional Opposition, or whatever, or casual, or I don't know, something like that. Cowards Against Thoughtful Opposition, I would say it that way. Whatever. Point is the Cato Institute loses a lot more favor with me every day that they exist, and it's because they're cowards. When the tough issues come up, they shrink in and do nothing about it. Continuing. His obsession with long-decided monetary policy and isolationism are not his only half-baked crusades. Paul's newsletters in the 80s and 90s. Oh, here we go. We're bringing up the newsletters. This is something that you normally hear out of the Young Turks, but apparently not. Apparently also jealous libertarians who feel snubbed by the fact that they can't have as much attention as Paul does are also in this camp of let's bring up something that we're not even sure he himself actually wrote. And indeed, there's actually an article from 2 years before this one saying that it was fairly likely that Lew Rockwell wrote those articles, and if not him, someone else did. But the point is, when you deal with what this government does to people every day, in either the Middle East or some other country we don't like, doesn't it come across as a little bit petty that we're bitching about things written 20 or 30 years ago? Things that are transparent and obviously tongue-in-cheek if you actually read the articles? Anyway, continuing on. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Paul is that thousands of intellectually curious young people will have read his silly books, including End the Fed, as serious manifestos, though you wouldn't know it by listening to Paul or reading his words. Libertarians do have genuine ideas that conservatives might embrace. Ladies and gentlemen, opposition to centralized banking has a long tradition in this country. If you look at Thomas Jefferson, if you look at Andrew Jackson, and if you look even to some later 19th century people, including even Abraham Lincoln himself. He used the greenback as a means to promote his war of choice, but when that war was over, when he saw what was going on with the central bank that or the banks that they had employed at the time, they didn't have a central bank, he was wary of the problems that come in when you give banks too much power over the control of the money supply. Too much centralized power. So apparently we can assume that David Harsanyi is not educated in history, and I would venture to guess that he's not. Anyway, continuing on. A serious libertarian, David Bose at the Cato Institute. Yes, that is the acid test of a serious libertarian. Must be a member of the Cato Institute. Bullshit. Anyway, continuing. Found that 14% of American voters could be classified as libertarian. Other surveys, he points out, find a large number of people who hold views that are neither consistently liberal nor conservative, but are best described as libertarian. The only thing that's really, just for me here, the only thing that really need to be considered with the libertarian mindset is a proactive view that liberty is the central focus of government. Not central planning, not power, liberty. And I would venture to guess there's a lot more libertarians than a lot of people think there actually are. And these people might not even be aware of it, because the media has put out so much nonsense that people are confused. People got confused into thinking that Barack Obama was an anti-war candidate. How much harder is it to believe that people who hold libertarian viewpoints have no idea about it and vote for the wrong candidates because they're getting nothing but lies from media outlets, such as the mainstream media, which also includes Reason magazine? Continuing. Seeing as the two top concerns at CPAC were reducing the size of the federal government, 35%, followed by reducing government spending, it is obvious the message of individual freedom and small government has resonance, but accepting Ron Paul as the leader of this, or actually any, charge is a mistake for both parties. And that is the end of the article. I'm just going to sum up my thoughts on this here right now. I know that a lot of my subscribers are also subscribed to Reason TV here on YouTube, and I know that a lot of people that I am friends with on here have a lot of respect for people like Ed Gillespie and the other people that you constantly see on TV. But with the exception of a handful of people like John Stossel and Andrew Napolitano, and over on MSNBC you've got Dylan Ratigan, and you've got you got John Cafferty or whatever his name is over in CNN. And you know something? Most libertarians in the media are less reliable when it comes to actually implementing this stuff than people like Jon Stewart. Okay? And just for everybody's knowledge, I am not subscribed to Reason TV. I occasionally go to their videos and I make comments. Sometimes I make positive comments when they say things that are appropriate to the libertarian ideology, but I know firsthand that these people are unreliable and, at best, inconsistent. That's the best they can be. And I don't hold out for the best case scenario with these people. I've seen too much bad stuff come out of this news outlet to take it seriously. So people can be mad at me about this if they want to, if they're attached to this news outlet. People can say that I'm breaking rank with the libertarian movement. People started saying that to me when I announced that I'd actually switched over to the Republican Party and that I'd actually got elected to local office here. But in truth, in many ways, I am separate and distinct from the libertarian movement, and so is Ron Paul. So are all of us. We have to keep in mind something here, that as a team, as a grouping of individuals, we have our own individual issues to consider, and we must all recognize that we're not going to agree on absolutely everything. But there are some fundamental standards of uniformity that are required for any kind of a cohesive and consistent movement. And Reason magazine and the whole flock over there are woefully compromised on this stuff. When you have writers like this deriding people who actually want to implement policies that will change the size and scope of government, that will reverse the tide of endless blood that we've been riding on. I think it's safe to say we're not really dealing with libertarians anymore. We have our own group, just like the Republicans have the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, and the Democrats have the dinos. We have linos. We have libertarians in name only. And they're a bunch of attention whores. And they need to be called on it. So go to the video that this is in response to, and I want you to watch this, all right? You will be watching an old-style conservative missus who's from the glory days of the Reagan era of triangulation, saying lots of good things and respectable things about Ron Paul. And then you're going to see a so-called libertarian basically tear him apart. Maybe we are old guard paleoconservatives rather than libertarians. Maybe that's what I am. Maybe that's more of what I am than a libertarian. And maybe that's more what Ron Paul is. But whatever you want to call him, he is the solution, not the problem. And when you hear anybody say that he is the problem, you need to correct them. You need to oppose them. You need to get in there and present a counterpoint. Don't let that stuff go by without a response. Anyway, I'm pretty well aggravated now, so I'm going to cut this short. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.